Let me just start off by saying, if the first two tables or the first two booths on today's video don't get your nips hard, you don't know anything about action figures, because these are two of the heavy hitter tables at the toy show. And for those of you guys wondering why I'm doing a voiceover now instead of live at the show itself, well, it's pretty straightforward. The music was blasting, and I honestly, not only could I not hear myself through the audio, but primarily the music could really get me into trouble with YouTube. I could get like a copyright strike or something like that. So I decided I'm just gonna leave the music out. I'll do a voiceover afterwards, and I'll kind of just talk you through some of the really cool, awesome tables that were there. Like I said, these were two of the best, especially with the old school McFarlane collection that they had going. All of those were roughly around like $80 to $100. And then there was that Moffick's table that had just some insane Spider-Man action figures and things of that nature. But just really cool collectibles there. Like I said, probably two of the best tables by far. And not to say that they necessarily had the best figures per se, but they just had some of the most coveted and difficult figures to find out in the wild. And because recently I don't really frequent toy stores as often as I did maybe say like a year and a half ago or 2 years, a lot of these figures are essentially stuff of legends, and I had only seen images online of them. It's definitely worth noting that a lot of the booths or tables did have a lot of open stuff. So if you were looking for just loose figures, you didn't care about the build of figures, you didn't care about the packaging, this was a perfect toy show for you guys. They also seem to be in pretty good condition for the most part, and they were not necessarily gouging you for some of these figures, because they weren't necessarily eBay prices. They were marked up quite a bit, but definitely not as high as say like eBay or Amazon or any of these third-party websites. And I have to say, I was definitely running on fumes. I had just finished playing some pickup ball at my local gym, and so I was really worn out, and my haggling skills just were not quite there. I wouldn't necessarily say that I got choke slammed or beat up too much with the prices, but I definitely wasn't on my A game. I think I could have gotten some slightly better prices on some of my pickups. And by the way, if you guys are interested in seeing what exactly it is that I picked up from the toy show, definitely stay tuned, because I will kind of keep you guys informed, or maybe I'll do a haul video soon, so stay tuned for that. And I know that many of you guys that haven't been following the channel from like day one are not familiar with the fact that I actually do collect Star Wars vintage action figures. I do have a pretty decent collection. I just don't open them. I usually display them mint on card, but they definitely had some decent options if you guys were looking to pick some extras or some figures that, you know, might have slipped through your fingers. I will say though, some of these tables had like very exact pricing. It wasn't like, you know, 20, 25, 30, which is usually what you see at these booths. But a lot of the time you saw like very accurate prices. Like some of these Star Wars vintage figures were going for like $13 or $12 or $24, $27, which makes me believe that they just had like eBay prices attached to them. They probably did their research. They probably looked at like sold listings and just, you know, slapped the exact price that they saw on there. But as you guys can see, for example, in these couple of bins, a lot of the figures were either $10 or $20. So there were definitely some bargains to be had. I think it just took a little bit of digging around and definitely a ton of patience. There was also some pretty interesting like custom art that people had at some of these tables. They were very interesting, nothing that really drew my attention too much. I don't necessarily have like a desk per se. I mean, I do have like a desk at work. It is essentially like a clean room environment, so we don't usually bring too much stuff from the outside in. And at home, like I said, don't really have a desk. I do have an area where I have all my collectibles and things of that nature, but not, I wouldn't say a desk per se. So this kind of stuff was really cool, something to look at. And if you want to kind of spruce up, like I said, your display or your work area or your desk, I think this type of stuff was just absolutely perfect. I will say, and I think unless you're like an avid toy hunter, you probably wouldn't know this, but I did see a lot of stuff that was popping up at like Ross and Burlington for, you know, $5 to $8. And a lot of people, I don't know if they were either trying to flip it or they just were not aware that a lot of these figures were going for like astronomically low prices. So that was just kind of interesting. I saw a lot of the GI Joes and a lot of Marvel Legends that I was picking up for, you know, $6, $7, $8. A lot of people were trying to sell them from anywhere from like $10 to $20, sometimes even $30 at their tables. So it definitely pays off to kind of keep track of prices, especially once they've left like the full retail floor, which is usually like Walmart, Target. Once you start seeing them at Ross, it's very important to keep track of all that stuff, because sometimes you might not know that some of these figures are going for $5 to $6, and then you might end up making the mistake of, you know, paying over retail at some of these toy shows. And let me just say, stuff got pretty intense, even though I arrived there towards the end of the day where not many people were funneling through, but there were still people like rubbing elbows. People get straight up in your face. There was somebody that I could literally smell onions in their breath, like maybe a bacon cheeseburger. I don't know what was going on, but people were definitely kind of like shadowing you just in case they see something that you may potentially pick up. I don't know. Like I said, it was interesting because I don't think that had ever happened to me. Usually I get there like an hour or two before the show is over, so I don't usually have that much competition, which in turn means a lot of the good stuff is already gone, but it was still pretty intense. It's also worth noting that I did notice there were way more sellers that had Funko Pops. That's usually not the case with these type of shows. Usually it's more like Marvel Legends, or a lot of McFarlane, or I should say just DC Multiverse in general, or a lot of retro stuff. But it's not really that common to see Funko Pops. I did see about like maybe 3 to 4 different booths with Funko Pops, and they did have quite a bit of variety. They had a little bit of Marvel, a ton of anime stuff, so there's definitely variety. There's a little bit for everybody. I will say, as is the case with some of the other booths, I feel like the prices were too on the nose. Like, they were just perfect. You know, if you look some of these up on eBay, if something was for $40, they were basically about $40. When it comes to the Pops, I don't think the deals were flowing as much. I did also find a lot of the old Mattel DC Multiverse stuff really cool to see. This was, I think, right before I actually started like full on collecting, so a lot of this stuff I completely missed out on, which I'm okay with. I prefer like the DC multiverse line from McFarlane, who's, you know, 7 inches bigger, bulkier. That's kind of what I prefer anyways. But yeah, they did have a ton of that old school Mattel stuff. A pretty decent array when it comes down to Black Series action figures. I was actually a little bit disappointed. There were not like any big heavy hitter stuff that's been out of stock. Most of the stuff was relatively new. I would say roughly about like 70% to 80% of all the figures at the toy show had been released within like the last 4 to 5 years. Most of this stuff was pretty readily available. My assumption is they probably had already sold out of all the good stuff, like all the figures that are incredibly hard to come by. So like I said, I probably should have gone there earlier, but like I said, I was playing some pickup ball, so I really didn't get an opportunity to arrive earlier. There was a bunch of loose stuff, and probably the highlight of the video honestly comes a little bit later, but I did run into the retro carded animated stuff like Wave 1, Wave 2. And I will say this, guys, I've completely lost hope in humanity, because a lot of these figures were very, very affordable, which made me kind of a little bit suspicious of it, just because I found, like, for example, the retro carded Spider-Man, the original one, was going for about $50. That figure usually goes for well over $100. So I'm assuming that they were not even sure that the figure was original. I'm assuming that there's some sort of shop or a store, and maybe somebody came and tried to sell it to them and they bought it on a whim. But a lot of this retro carded stuff, I think the symbiote Spider-Man, the old school retro carded Spider-Man, a lot of those figures are being mass produced from overseas, and a lot of them are not originals. A lot of them are knockoffs. They're being redistributed by a lot of the factories. So it's very important to keep an eye on stuff like that. It's one of the main reasons that I stopped collecting Funko Pops. And now the retro carded line is another really big one that's on my radar, just because it's very difficult to tell what's original, what's knockoff, and I just don't want to deal with the hassle. So I ended up skipping on those retro carded figures, but they looked absolutely brilliant. They did have a lot of the old school Spider-Man action figures, which I'm a huge fan of. A lot of these were like mid 2010s, which is usually when a lot of the Spider-Man stuff was picking up in value because of Into the Spider-Verse and just the Spider-Verse in general. But as I mentioned earlier, essentially a lot of those booths were basically eBay prices. So I asked around here a little bit here and there, but people were pretty stern on their prices, so I decided to skip out on a lot of those. All in all, guys, I had an absolute blast, and like I said earlier in the video, I wish I would have been able to do some live commentary, but the music was just holding me back. I didn't want to take the risk of getting a copyright strike or getting into any issues like that, so I just decided, you know, do a voiceover. And I am very excited about the figures that I picked up, because it's one that I'm not too familiar with. I only own like a couple of figures, and then the other OM is completely new to me. It's a completely new line. I've never bought anything from them, so it's very exciting. I'm pretty sure I'll be doing reviews on those figures, so stay tuned. As I said, hopefully you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. I had a ton of fun at the toy show, and I'll put all the information down below because I think they're going to be doing some here locally. It's here, like I said, it's in Arizona. It's kind of like headed towards Scottsdale, kind of on the border of it. So if you guys are interested, like I said, I'll put their information down below. You guys can check it out when the new one comes out. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hit the like button, subscribe. Let me know down below your thoughts. Do you guys like doing these type of toy shows? Do you guys not? Do you guys rather prefer stay home and just order them online? Let me know down below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.